This is The Metro. I'm Tia Graham. You're listening to 1019 WDET. Right now, my guest is Randall Maurice Jelks. He's a professor of history and author of the new book, My America, Langston Hughes on Democracy. We're discussing, of course, Hughes's works and his commentary on American politics and society during that time. Dr. Jelks, I want to push back just a little bit and talk a little bit about respectability politics. You know, there's a version of climb the mountain that sounds, once again, like respectability politics, to assimilate, to be palatable, to reach across the aisle. And then there's what Hughes was actually saying, which was almost the opposite. It was to stay rooted, to stay grounded in your voice. You write that Hughes called on Black artists to build their temples, and then you include, we stand on top of the mountain, free within ourselves. What does freedom within yourself look like when the institution you're entering already has a mountain that needs to be climbed?
Well, he was talking about being writers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's in a debate with W.E.B. Du Bois. There's a documentary coming out on Du Bois May 19th, and he's in a fierce debate. He's a young man in debate with Du Bois because Du Bois says, art has to be propaganda. It has to push the agenda of the people. That it has to make sure people are seen. And Hughes wants to say, no, we have to be seen as human,
Mm.
and that a writer, a poet, um, has the right to express both the good, the bad, the ugly of Black life, and that's freedom. And the truth is that that's the kind of freedom we want as Black people. That we none of us are all good and none of us are all bad. We want the freedom to be able to just be simply human, and that's what he's arguing in that particular essay that came out in 1926, to be exact, in the Nation magazine. He's arguing that fiercely, and it's called the Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain. That he's arguing with actually another Black poet, County Cullen, says, "I just want to be a poet," and Langston says, you're avoiding the word Black, and you don't think being a Negro poet is a good thing, and I would beg to differ with you about that.
Mm-hmm.
That it is something to say I'm a Black poet. That doesn't mean I'm over against anybody, but that there's something beautiful about that. And I think that's an important thing for the audience to hear. Langston used the term Black before uh, James Brown ever did in 1967. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud.
Yeah.
And all of his poetry say there is something beautiful about Blackness. And he learned this, I think, in 1923 when he traveled all the way to Angola and back, and to as a sailor, and seeing Africa for the first time with his own eyes, even before other major people, again like Du Bois, had seen Africa. So it's important that to note that he was saying something that is beautiful. And Blackness is also beautiful. It's ugly. It's like everything else in life.
Yes. So, Dr. Jelks, staying in the frame of art is revolution. I want to start with your statement that art is never neutral. You said that art supports empire building and conquest just as readily as it aids a revolution. So, this hearing you say that and talk about Hughes and being one of the first to say Black, in a way that was of pride, what do you mean when you say art is never neutral?
Well, I mean, art takes sides. I mean, when people like to go to Greece and Rome and all those places, uh, those are those are artistic pieces stating power and authority. It's like Confederate monuments. I grew up in New Orleans till I was 14,
Yeah.
and I lived near Lee Circle, which stated it plainly that Lee Circle was for white supremacy. Art is powerful, might be beautifully done, might be beautifully rendered. So art has sides, and artists take sides in issues of struggle, in issues of justice, all sides. And so art does speak to art. And that's important. That was important for him to get people to understand that art's never neutral. Who we depict, how we depict them, think about it. If you ever go back, and you're younger than I am, but if you go back and look at Ebony magazine, the beauty of the week used to be always someone who was fair, phenotypically had some Caucasian features. That's art. The photographer is doing a great job, but what is it saying about people who are like my grandmother, who was ebony in complexion and chocolate and as they say on the streets, thick. What would they? What does that say? So art is never neutral. It's taking sides, and the conversation between artists is, "Oh, why are you depicting only that as opposed to this? Where is the struggle of the peasants or the slaves depicted in the art as heroic and noble and so forth?" So that's what Langston is trying to get us to understand.
And Dr. Jelks, it's a perfect transition because, you write about Hughes and his approach to fighting back against a representation of Hollywood at that time, and all of the satire and the muted heroes that you were talking about. So could you talk a little bit about what he was fighting against and what the stakes actually were at that time?
Well, Hughes, as a writer, again, wanted to do what other writers had been invited by Hollywood to do, write screenplays, right? I mean, it's the Great Depression, it's the early 40s. I mean, the war takes us out the depression, but ain't nobody got no money. Writers, too. So they invite people like William Faulkner, John Steinbeck, a whole host of writers to come aboard and write screenplays. Of course, the only depiction of black people in Hollywood was the minstrel character.
Yeah.
That character lasted for a long time in one form or fashion. I mean, Spike Lee does his movie Bamboozle
Mm.
about this, but Hughes is trying to write, and he gets credit for being the first black screenwriter, but unfortunately, his own screenplay is taken and again made singing spirituals. Again, another kind of depiction of a kind of form of black people are more spiritual than other people. And so his screenplay gets murdered. And second, he gets, but nobody really remembers it because the same year that his movie came out, Way Down South, there was a blockbuster that came out called Gone with the Wind, which
Yes.
was an even more horrible kind of minstrel show with slaves being the good darkies in that movie.
Yes, now that film actually has a disclaimer beforehand, just to kind of let folks know what's going on within the film as they're watching Gone with the
Yeah,
Wind.
yeah.
This is the Metro. I'm Tia Graham. We're speaking with Professor Randall Maurice Jelks, author of the new book My America: Langston Hughes on Democracy. We're exploring the democratic works of the famed poet and writer and why his words still ring true today. Now, I want to end in the start to wrap up our conversation, of course, but I want to end where your book ends. And honestly, where I think Detroit lives right now, because this city has produced some of the most joyful music on earth in the middle of some of the most painful circumstances. We think about Motown and techno and gospel music, and you argue in the book that Hughes understood that joy was not the opposite of struggle. It was part of the practice of democracy. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. First of all, you left out jazz, and I think it's
Oh, I'm so
unfair.
sorry. You don't.
It's
Oh my
so
God,
unfair to
they're gonna come
Detroit.
for me, Dr. Jokes. They're gonna come for me. Oh no.
They won't come for you. I'm mentioning Detroit produced some of the greatest jazz musicians the world has seen, and so Detroit has been at a center, along with New Orleans, of a musical life for and a musical voice for the country, and so it's important to remember that.
Yes.
I think that use is really saying that. In this struggle, we have to find our own joy. And it's not a struggle. And people, um, with some new kinds of respectability politics, thought, oh, the struggle should have been gone with DEI and this and that. And I'm always trying to remind my students and people I talk to in the public that the empire always strikes back, because they have an ideology that sees themselves in power, and so we are not yet in power. We had a first black president, um, but we didn't change the kind of way we politically organize. And so these are the kinds of things, and Hughes understood these kinds of things. I think this is the job of the writer and the poet, to help us understand things that we might not see. We might want to put things in another category, but poets and writers help us to see and to imagine what a different world would look like. And that's what Hughes is always asking us: what does this different world look like? And what does freedom mean for us now? And what does freedom between ourselves mean? And that is the respect of one another, and our own self-respect. So those are the kinds of issues that I think he's dealing with for our times. In a city like Detroit, when Detroit is, unfortunately, Detroit is gentrifying. It needed to gentrify, but it is unequal, as that gentrification is unequal as has been in the past. And so we have to, our political thinkers and our political organizers have to think, what does democracy mean as we go into a new century with new issues before us?
And I want to stick right there because based on all of the work that you've done, the research that you've done, what would Hughes say to Detroit right now, especially through his writings and his poetry?
Oh, he would be saying the same thing, I think, that he said in the 30s and 40s. And I think that, Detroit has just such again, another tradition that we don't think about is literary tradition. I think
Yes.
about Dudley Randall and a whole host of people publishing poems and publishing people's work. Cities like Detroit, one of the blacker cities in the United States, right? And we have to continue to figure out how to forge new economic sharing and new economic support of the arts. And that's what Detroit is challenged to do. And we have to have some younger politicians with not so much the kind of corporate liberalism that has been expressed in Black politics of late, but also what does it mean to have cooperative economics? That's what the things I think the youth would be thinking and asking us through poetry, through plays, and so forth. And I'll leave it with this. One of his great musicals uh, uh, that is used to render his poetry is "Don't You Want to Be Free?" And I think that's the question. Don't you want to be free? And freedom means a lot, and freedom means a lot to individuals, but also to the collective. And we have to continue to think in those terms.
One last question before we wrap things up. After everything that you've researched and learned and studied about Langston Hughes over the years, what you've been able to teach and the things that, once again, you've been able to learn and grasp, how do you want people to use Hughes's works in real time right now?
Well, this book all started from trying to do a documentary that my colleague and I are still working on. My colleague named Kevin Wilmot, who won a Academy Award for Best Screenplay Adaptation with Spike Lee for Black Klansman. So we continue to work. Hughes was international. By the 1930s, in his early 30s, he was being internationally translated, and he has something to teach the new generation. So I'm hoping that we find funders for our documentary projects. We have footage and all of this other stuff, but there's still more work to be done because he was so global and so important in the world. He was a worldwide poet and writer by the 1930s, and that's amazing to me. And I want young people to know about this interesting life this person had.
Randall Maurice Jelks is a professor, documentary producer, and award winning author. His latest book is titled My America, Langston Hughes on Democracy. You can meet Dr. Jelks this weekend at Source Booksellers right here in the Cass Corridor. He'll be in conversation with Michigan's Poet Laureate, Melba Boyd, along with a book signing. Dr. Jelks, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro today.
Thank you so much, and thanks to the people of Detroit. Come out and see us.
That's it for The Metro. The Metro is hosted by Robin Vincent and me, Tia Graham. It's produced by Sam Corey and Carrie Jr. II. Our engineer is Jose Yanis, and our senior producer is David Lyons. And you can find all of our conversations you hear on the show at wdet.org/metro, or just find the Metro Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University, and this is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. You all have a great day. Welcome back to the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham. Langston Hughes is one of the most recognized names in American literature. His poems are taught in classrooms, his lines quoted at marches and memorials and Sunday morning services. But that celebration comes with a cost, because the Hughes has been made comfortable, sanitized, stripped of his edges. And what gets lost in that sanitizing is the very thing that made him so influential. Here was a man who believed that art was never neutral, that democracy was not something America had achieved, but something it still owed its people. He championed that practicing respectability politics was in itself a form of political control. He wrote about it, he lived it, and in his own life, he faced the impossible choice that respectability politics always eventually demands: your safety or your principles, your platform or... For residents in Detroit who have built their own armor out of necessity, who dressed and spoke professionally at work, this book is not just about Langston Hughes. It's about every Black family that ever had to decide how much of themselves to show in order to make it through the world. Randall Maurice Jelks is a professor, documentary producer, award-winning author. His new book, My America, Langston Hughes on Democracy, he strips away the veneer placed on Hughes's legacy to reveal the radical, clear-eyed democratic thinker underneath. Dr. Jelks, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Of course. So jumping in, Dr. Jelks, the version of Langston Hughes that gets taught in schools and quoted at galas is celebrated as safe and comfortable. And then there's the Hughes in your book. You write specifically about removing the respectability veneer placed on his legacy. What is that veneer made of, and who put it there?
Well, I mean, the society as a whole, and the veneer of respectability wasn't just about Black folks. It was about people all over the world as the world changed from sort of being an agrarian society to a capitalist industrial society. So everybody wanted to assume the veneer of respectability. I don't care what the ethnic group is. It had particular form on Black people because of the United States being a slave-holding society at one time. And Hughes comes into this, into a family that is abolitionist and is fighting against slavery and fighting against the Black people being made abject. So that's really important for us to understand.
And I want to stick there, of course, the respectability question, but it gets particularly sharp in your book when you talk about and highlight Hughes' sexuality. You're not the first to write about it either. Faith Berry, author, editor, and professor discussed it in 1983. And
Yeah.
Hughes was almost certainly gay or bisexual, and he kept it deeply and carefully private his entire life. Now, you could read that privacy as respectability, as conforming to what his community expected of him, but you offer another reading. Can you talk about that?
Well, Langston didn't want to be known about who he was making love with.
Yeah.
Being a writer is it being a writer. I mean, one can be gay, lesbian, trans, but that wouldn't make you necessarily a writer. So that identity he didn't lead with. He led with what he wrote, and that's what he wanted to be known by. And I think that's why he kept mainly closed mouth about who he did what with. And also, Langston was born in 1901, and he was born in Joplin, Missouri, and then reared in Lawrence, Kansas. And I think the kind of Midwest sensibility that he grew up with is that there are certain things like mind your own business.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's none of your business.
that's just none of your business. It's my business, and move on.
Exactly. So, respectability in Black America specifically was never just about manners, Dr. Jelks. For a lot of Black families, it was armor. The thing you put on to get through the door, to keep your children safe, and so on and so forth. So, where is the line between respectability as survival and respectability as surrender?
Well, the thing is that we're all shaped by ideologies,
Mm,
right? I mean, we all shaped by a set of ideas that most of us in life don't really completely think through. So we are set by a set of ideas about consumerism or this or that. And what Langston wanted to challenge was the kind of the assumptions of, for no better word, bourgeois culture.
yes.
Uh, he wanted to challenge how we looked at ourselves, what made us have uh, entertainment and fun, because the same people who put on the armor of respectability, if you were playing spades or bidwiz or whatever the card game you were playing with, it would take on a whole nother persona. And he wanted that persona, the persona that laughed and cared about people, and drink whiskey and other kinds of things. So he understood that, but he also understood that that we also have to strive for freedom in our personal day-to-day interaction with one another. And he especially observed that living in Washington D.C. for a time with the other side of his family, who were kind of really the people who don respectability politics all the time.
Yes, and I wanted you, if you can, expand on that just a little bit. That time that he was in, that the black bourgeoisie that you're talking about, and in the mirror he was putting up to them, and asking them questions about who they were and their position in this space.
Yeah, he has this essay that's in the book called "Wonderful Society," and he's really examining the side of his family. There are two sides of the Langstons. That was his grandparents who reared him on the Langston side, and so the Langstons' history is that they are gun-toting abolitionists from Ohio that go to Kansas, right?
Mm,
There's a famous raid in Oberlin called the Oberlin Wellington raid, which is led by his grandfather and about 30 men to rescue a fugitive slave. And Langston's grandfather goes on trial for that and beats it. And then eventually he goes to Kansas. The younger brother winds up becoming the first black congressman from James Mercer Langston from Virginia. And that Washington, D.C. side begins to put on more and more heirs. They have they have earned more money out in Kansas, where his grandparents who reared him, they're kind of shabby gentry, I call them. They don't have as much money, but they are still engaged in with people who have been freedom seekers, people who have gotten across the Kansas River to freedom. So those are two sides. And Hughes grew up with plain, ordinary people. And when he gets to Washington, he despises the pretense.
Yeah.
Yeah, you went to a certain school, but you're still working as a page in the Congress, or you're still working as a butler in the Congress without understanding the class sensibilities.
Mm. This is the Metro. I'm Tia Graham. We're speaking with Professor Randall Maurice Jelks, author of the new book My America: Langston Hughes on Democracy. We're exploring the democratic works of the famed poet and why his words still ring true today. Now, Dr. Jelks, you write about Hughes's time before a government committee, McCarthy and McCarthyism, at the height of the Red Scare, when the wrong words in the wrong room could end your entire career. It could end your freedom, especially at that time. That was the trap of respectability politics at that moment. Langston Hughes didn't surrender, he didn't fully fight, but he still let everyone down at that moment.
I I don't see it that way.
Okay.
I see that the man was 52 years old, trying to save an artistic career. At the same time, he's coming before the McCarthy committee. He's also publishing books by African writers. This is called the African Treasury. So I see Hughes doing two things. He's trying to save his own behind. I
Hmm.
mean, that's true. But he never testifies against anyone. He just makes it rather milk toast at the advice of his counsel, not to fight the this in the way. So I think he's doing both. People were disappointed, and what they were disappointed by is like some people like Du Bois were left out of the first book of the Negro,
Yes.
a children's book he wrote, because he was trying to be careful not to signal that he was in radical cahoots. So people's feelings got hurt, but he really never let anybody down by testifying against him. I mean, unlike Jackie Robinson, and there's a rich book by Howard Bryan on Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson. Uh, Robinson has to come out and testify against Robeson. Um, Hughes doesn't testify against anybody, and he walks away and he continues to do the work, and he's quietly doing this international work of publishing some great young African writers at the same time.
So when we talk about that moment in time, like you explained, he didn't let anyone down, but he made sure that he still stood for what he believed in, but he also had to save his own skin. When we
Right.
see that and we talk about that, even today, how is that viewed? How would that be viewed today?
Well, I don't know how it would be viewed. Everybody comes to these things differently, right? I mean, Langston certainly didn't do what Coleman Young did.
Hmm.
I mean, Coleman Young testifying before that McCarthy hearing in Detroit is fierce, but they have different lives.
Hmm.
Coleman was a Tuskegee Airman. He had been to a battle, been to war. Langston was a jovial, reserved kind of person. Um, and so he's doing what he was doing at the council. So temperament has all the ways that you'll testify. But people always will see heroes as being, they want, particularly men, they want them to have that James Earl Jones voice and thunder back at the crowd. But sometimes you do have to save your own butt.
Yeah, yes.
Keep
so
going.
so Dr. Jelks, speaking of that time, you said he was in his 50s when he testified or spoke before a government committee. And, he spoke in a way that he made sure that he was still standing proud with what he believed in, but he also saved himself. Now, I want to go back briefly to when Hughes stood before an international audience in Paris when he was a little bit of a younger man. And he said then, we Negroes in America do not have to be told what fascism is in action. We know. So, what was Hughes seeing in 1937 that people in power are still refusing to see today?
Well, we are in a period where the Voting Rights Act is being challenged, of course, and Jim Crow was as authoritarian as the Nazis. In fact, the South Africans learned about apartheid from the white South. What the white South had done was apartheid. So Hughes' understanding that he had traveled through the South. He wasn't a Southerner, but he had traveled through the South, and he had seen with his own eyes the Scottsboro case of 1931. He had seen with his own eyes uh, the kind of repression by riding the trains uh, uh, and, and so forth. So he gave voice to that repression matched the repression of what was going on in Europe in the 1930s as well. And all of this was a racialized rhetoric.
Now, you write that Hughes wasn't being pessimistic in his criticism of the U.S., he was being precise. And I think that distinction is everything. There is a difference between a people who have given up on democracy and a people who have studied its failures up close and are still showing up anyway. How do you hold that distinction in his work, and what does it need to be made right now? And how does it need to be made right now?
Well, I mean, of course, Hughes wasn't a sort of political theorist. He
Mm.
was a writer, and I think we should make that distinction. As a writer, he first wanted to help Black people understand their own democratic lives. Sometimes we think about the kind of general state, but we don't think about Black people as being democratic people with diversity and argumentation, whether it was about church or religion or whatever we have in common and distinctions. And we were already practicing democracy among ourselves, but the country wasn't practicing democracy. And he wanted to remind people of that we have been shaped by a democratic struggle. I mean, think about it. If you thought about it, we were here before the Constitution, and we are here in its reshaping. And we have certain democratic principles that we hold to in everyday life. And I think we have to think about those things and learn to respect and enjoy those things.
This is the Metro. I'm Tia Graham. Right now, we're speaking with Professor Randall Maurice Jelks, author of the new book, My America, Langston Hughes on Democracy. And right now, we're exploring the democratic works of the famed poet and why his words still ring true today. When we return, we will continue this conversation with Dr. Jelks. You all stay right there. This is the Metro.